This is NatSec Matters.
I'm host Michael Allen with Beacon Global Strategies. Today I'm joined by Nico Lange, non-resident senior fellow with the Transatlantic Defense and Security Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Nico Lange is also a senior fellow at the Munich Security Conference. Mr. Lange joins us for a discussion on the status of the conflict in Ukraine and the broader outlook for European security. Stay with us as we speak with Nico Lange. Nico Lange, welcome to NatSec Matters.
Thank you for having me.
Nico, you're the perfect person for us to visit about Ukraine. Not only do you visit there, you're a well-known expert, having worked in the German government in national security for some time. We want to really begin with the dynamics in Ukraine. As I understand it, you visited recently. I wonder if you just might update us on how you think the battlefield situation is going.
Yeah, I go there quite often, and I also do research on the battlefield. So I really go out to the area where at the moment the fighting is going on. And in a short summary, the situation on the ground can be described from a Ukrainian perspective as certainly not great, but not a catastrophe. The so-called Russian summer offensive did not yield results for the Russian side. Russia is continuing to attack, to stay in the initiative, but you have to imagine this as small-scale infantry attacks that are then countered with Ukrainian FPV drones. Russia is progressing very, very, very slowly under heavy losses. And Russia did not achieve its military goals, not with the so-called summer offensive, but not overall in this war. That's on the ground. If you could say it's like an equilibrium that has been reached, and both sides can continue this for a long time. But there is a second war going on. It's the war in the air, with Russia attacking Ukrainian infrastructures and cities, especially with hundreds of Geran 2 drones, formerly Iranian drones, now Russian-produced. And the masses of the drones are a real problem because they are saturating the air defenses. And Russia is mixing those drones with missiles and ballistic missiles and aeroballistic missiles, and that is doing damage to Ukrainian energy infrastructures, but is also hitting Ukrainian cities with civilians. On the other side, Ukraine has developed more and more instruments of its own to strike deep into Russia, targeting refineries, LNG terminals, other parts of the Russian infrastructure. And that is painful for the Russian side. And the Trump administration is more open to delivering Ukraine capabilities for deep strikes and helping with intelligence for deep strikes, so that there's more dynamic in this air war at the moment than in the war on the ground.
Yeah.
That's where we are right now. And it is a moment where something can be achieved to put Putin under more pressure and to pressure him into coming really to the table. I think there is such a possibility from now until the end of the year.
All right. Well, that's great. So I think I hear you saying equilibrium on the battlefield. I used to say that the Russians were making incremental progress, but yeah, I think pretty much that incrementalism has slowed down. On the refineries, I mean, isn't that the biggest story? I mean, the Russian oil production is down 20%. We can look online and see cars in long lines to get gasoline. I mean, this might be the first time the Russians have felt the effects of the war, at least the everyday consumer.
That brings the war to Russia, also Ukraine. And it can only be with acceptance of the US partners, Ukraine turning out the lights in one major Russian city in Belgorod. So the Russians are feeling the war. And in the energy sector in Russia, it's painful for Putin. Maybe not as painful that he is changing his behavior, but together with other measures, secondary tariffs on Indian oil that is mainly Russian oil, bringing oil prices down so that the revenue stream for Russia is much lower than it was before. In this combination, Putin feels the pressure. And we have to work, all Europeans, Americans, we have to work more into this direction to really bring him to the table and to have a serious conversation about ceasefire and possibly peace. Ukraine will have more instruments for the deep strikes. So from a Russian side, you can expect it's getting worse. Trump has agreed already to ERAM missiles. There is a discussion about even a possible delivery and transfer of Tomahawk missiles that will also pressure the Europeans when it comes to their own capabilities, because I'm sure Trump will only deliver Tomahawk if Germany, for example, delivers the Taurus. So there is movement into a direction that puts more pressure on Putin, and we should not let the time go to waste. I mean, I think during the Biden administration, the US and the Europeans very often made the mistake of giving Putin too much time to regroup, to find new ways of putting pressure, to adapt his tactics. If now something can be done faster, not giving Putin the time, I think more can be achieved.
So what do you think the Russian war aims are at this time? Is it simply to take the 4 major provinces that are discussed all the time, and if they can't get them on the battlefield, they want it at the negotiating table, and then they might see that as enough of a victory to freeze the conflict?
I think the military war aims of Vladimir Putin are unachievable for Russia. So taking full control over Ukraine, changing the European order by force, he is very, very far away from that. And also what used to be the incremental progress in eastern Ukraine. I mean, if you calculate this, it would take a couple of 100 years to progress at that speed. But Putin continues the war because he hopes for a political opening. I think at this point, his war aims are more political, driving a wedge between the Europeans and the US, driving a wedge between different groups of Europeans, challenging even Article 5 and showing that NATO is not really working in Europe. I mean, that seems to be part of his political war aims. And he might calculate that there might be conditions that are more in favor of the Russian interests when France might get a right-wing government. Germany now has the AfD as the highest polling party. So he seems to target those political aims, and he keeps the war running.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, let's talk a little bit about Russia's extraordinary gray zone activities in Europe. They, I believe, have been engaging in sabotage for the last couple of years. Now it appears that they are regularly mounting incursions into NATO territory, certainly with drones. First, just sort of update us on where things are. I know it's gone as far as Denmark and even Germany, I think, but certainly Estonia. Sort of tell us where we are in all these gray zone incursions, and what do you think the Russians are up to?
Yeah, Putin has been engaging in gray zone activities against Europe, I think, for the last 10, 12 years already. But they have changed since the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, because what used to be cyber attacks and disinformation is now more combined with sabotage, with arsoning, but also with murders going on in Europe. I mean, one person has been killed in the center of Berlin. So this is a new quality. Also, incursions from the outside, but also drones that clearly are started somewhere on the inside or are started from ships that belong to the Shadow Fleet in the Baltic Sea, over military locations, over civilian airports. It's all part of a Russian way of trying to find vulnerabilities, exploiting them, trying to stimulate a political discussion that is moving the attention away from Ukraine to more domestic security matters in Europe. And unfortunately, Putin has found vulnerabilities that he is exploiting, for example, with the drones, because there's no good drone defense throughout Europe, not even good drone detection. And he sniffs weaknesses out. That's, his instinct as a former KGB agent. And we just heard the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, saying, look, we are not shooting Russian planes down. If they are not posing a threat, we just accompany them in our airspace when they violate the airspace. I do not think that this is sending a message of deterrence to the Russian side. If we are very friendly, flying along with the Russian drones and missiles in our airspace, that doesn't seem to be the right signal. So unfortunately, I think Putin will try to exploit this more.
Yeah, I think so too. Talk a little bit about how he wants to split NATO or show that it's not working. Is it that the drone incursions occur and just the mere fact that we don't do enough about it shows that we're a paper tiger, or to drill down on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think his attention on changing the European order is not so much about territory. It's about undermining NATO. And best way to undermine NATO is to organize incursions, extend the gray zone on the borders of Belarus or on the borders of Kaliningrad, flying into airspace and showing NATO is not doing anything. Or playing on rifts within NATO where the Nordic Baltic 8 are saying, look, we need to shoot those planes down. But Germany, France, others trying to calm them down. No, we don't have to do anything. And as soon as a small rift is there, Putin will try to exploit this, to have a split between the Central Eastern Europeans and Northern Europeans and the more, if you want to say so, old Europeans in the classic West. And so far, you cannot say it's not working. Europeans have clearly problems in how to deal with drone incursions, with plane incursions, but also with drones that are used inside of the countries. And there is still, when it comes to how to support Ukraine and speaking out, yes, we have to beat Russia, there is still a split in Europe. Yeah, the Nordic Baltic 8, they are saying Russia needs to be defeated. And Germans, Italians, French, Spanish, they are not saying this out loud. And Putin will try to exploit this more. And then there, of course, are also financial questions. And we have now in Europe a group of countries, France with not having a government again, deeply in debt, not really having money, Spain not having a regular budget, I think, for the last 3 years. So the question is also who really has the resources to continue also buying weapons from the US for Ukraine, but also to continuing the defense buildup in Europe. So this is all things that Putin is looking into and that he is trying to play on and to exploit for his interests. And also he sees that with Hungary, with the Slovak Republic, maybe now after the elections also with the Czech Republic, he has some instruments also to delay decisions in the European Union or to even block them.
Yeah.
And he is actively engaging also in that.
Okay. I'm going to come back to Putin's support for, first I'm going to come back to whether Germany is the country that can help do more to finance this war. But just on the topic that you've raised here, you mentioned AfD earlier, and now we've cited political chaos in a couple of other European states. Tell us a little bit about AfD, and I know they're sort of pro-Russian, or at least more inclined to see that point of view. Are the Russians funding AfD, and what's their appeal?
There are documented connections between AfD politicians and Russia when it comes to finances, political guidance. This is documented also by intelligence services. It's one of the reasons why the AfD is under surveillance by the domestic intelligence service in Germany, for reasons that honestly go beyond my understanding as somebody who has lived in Russia, who speaks fluent Russian and knows Russia and Putin very well. They think that for German nationalism, Russia might be a partner. To me, that looks like the AfD are traitors, to be honest, who are betraying the German interests. But it is a logic that you can find around the world, that right-wing populist parties believe that a partnership with Russia should be that is something good. And Putin has been very good in exploiting this by trying to create the impression that he is Christian, religious, family-oriented and all that. I mean, it's all rubbish. It's a KGB agent playing KGB agent games. But it seems Putin is a projection for many about somebody with a strong hand, with traditional values and all of that. The AfD is echoing the Kremlin line on foreign policy. And that is where the AfD aligns with Russian hybrid warfare. I mean, the goal of Russian hybrid warfare is to align the foreign policy, the defense policy of other countries with the Russian interest. And the Kremlin surely sees the AfD as a tool for that.
Yeah.
And you can see that Russian narratives are spread directly into AfD channels, and from there they come into the political discussion in Germany. And very interestingly, you can see that the Kremlin messages are very often also parroted one-to-one, word by word, by the far right and by the far left in the German political discourse, which is not unusual. I think it happens elsewhere as well. But Germany is a main target country for Russia when you see how much money Russia is investing into disinformation, into influence operations in the German space. Clearly, they see Germany as something like a key for European decision-making.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. So let's talk more about Germany's pivotal role in Europe. You referenced earlier who's going to pay for a lot of this, munitions and European financing of the war. France is in crisis. Spain has no budget. Tell us about politics in Germany. Tell us about the relatively new chancellor. Is he as pro-Ukraine as he seems? Is he going to spend a lot of money? Is the pledged 5% increase in defense and infrastructure spending real? Tell us about politics in Germany.
We are in now long enough into a new government to understand those things better. And I would say it's an ambivalent picture with a tendency to the positive, but still ambivalent. I mean, Friedrich Merz did not all that he promised for Ukraine when he became chancellor. And he has difficulties, as others had before, with his coalition partner, the SPD, where some are still very ideologically believing in a world that does not exist anymore. But there are, I think, very positive elements, sometimes even underappreciated, because they are also very relevant for the transatlantic relationship. Friedrich Merz, with the changes in the German constitution to modify the debt brake, even before he took government, he got himself some fiscal space. And that already played out. I mean, if you look into the Pearl program, PURL, Prioritized Ukraine Resources List, which is now a NATO program to deliver military capabilities from the US into Ukraine. I mean, it's remarkable. It's underreported, maybe because there's so much going on, but it is the core of this was Friedrich Merz talking to President Trump about the possibility that the Europeans are paying for Patriot systems and Patriot missiles that are needed for Ukraine. And it's now a fully fledged program where NATO partners in Europe are paying money to get very important military capabilities for Ukraine from the United States. They are paying for it. And NATO is coordinating it. And I mean, it's not so long ago, and you remember it, Michael, when Sullivan and Biden were very, very keen on never to bring NATO into this business of assisting Ukraine. And now with this instrument, NATO is the clearinghouse, coordinating with the general staff of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Europeans are paying to bring the US capabilities in. And I think that's to a large part an achievement by Friedrich Merz, starting this conversation. So that's good. And it might be expanded also when it comes to ERAM missiles, Tomahawk missiles, other military capabilities that help increasing pressure on Putin. In the European defense discussion, of course, there will always be a dilemma how much of the money to use to buy capabilities from partners such as the US, and how much of the money to use for driving European defense innovation, defense technology, European capabilities, and also replacing US enabling capabilities that the US might need elsewhere, in the Indo-Pacific or elsewhere. I think the Europeans have to not only think about this, they also have to discuss this with the US to make it an orderly process, to replace US capabilities that at the moment committed to Europe with European capabilities to free them up for the US to use. I think it's a process that many US governments talked about over the last decades.
Yeah.
And it's now becoming more real. And Germany is the key country because of its size, when Germany now has a midterm financial planning to move from around 80 billion of defense spending this year up to 162 billion per year over the next years. That's for the first time that I see not only words, but I see the numbers in the midterm financial planning. So the German defense buildup is real. And I can tell you, in this space, defense technology, defense industry, I have never seen the dynamics as I have seen over the last months in Germany and in Europe. Many companies entering the market, many new ideas, many defense startups and scale-ups, industry partnerships in a new way, joint ventures with US companies that are producing in Europe. So there is a lot going on. And this time it's real.
Does President Trump get any credit for this in a backwards way because he scared the hell out of Europe at the beginning of his term that we were out for good?
Yes, I think everybody understands that the NATO summit, where the Europeans committed to 3.5% defense spending plus 1.5% for defense-related infrastructures, was only possible because of the outside pressure from President Trump. And Germany, of course, getting real is mainly the effect of the Russian threat and of the war at our borders, where the Europeans understand they need to step up. But maybe, in a weird psychological way, sometimes the Europeans need some unfriendly words about how to move forward, because if you are too friendly with them, they relax too early.
Right. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more of our discussion with Nico Lange.
If you're looking for a way to make a difference this Veterans Day, consider the work of Hero Dogs, a local DC nonprofit that improves the lives of our nation's heroes by placing skilled service dogs with veterans and first responders living with disabilities. Beacon Global Strategies is proud to sponsor our very own hero dog, Ginny, who's currently trained to support a future veteran. You can follow Ginny's journey on Instagram at HeroDogsGinny. That's at HeroDogsGinny, Ginny with a G. To learn more about how you can help make a difference this Veterans Day, please visit www.hero-dogs.org. Happy Veterans Day.
I want to come back to you living in Russia and get a sense of regime dynamics. I really love that topic in the Kremlin and elsewhere. But tell us about the Taurus missile. Why hasn't Germany turned this over to Ukraine? And do you believe that President Trump is very, very serious? Well, let's say Trump is not going to give Tomahawks unless the Germans give the Taurus missile. Is that enough to convince Merz to do it?
To be honest with you, Michael, I do not really understand anymore why Germany is not delivering Taurus. I think it should have delivered it a long time ago. New arguments are made up all of the time why it's not possible, but it's the situation where you come up with new arguments all of the time because you do not want to. If you want to, then you find solutions for everything that has been discussed. It is a coalition government, and the SPD and large parts of the SPD, the Social Democrat Party, they are still opposing this, and they are maybe limiting the room for maneuver for Merz on this. But it's an interesting situation now, because the Trump administration is pressuring Putin and the Europeans at the same time. Because very similar to what is happening when it comes to tariffs or secondary tariffs on India, for example, for buying Russian oil, Trump is now saying, look, I can move further on this if the Europeans move. They still buy Russian oil or Indian oil that is Russian oil, Russian gas, LNG, and other commodities. So if the Europeans move on this, then the US will move further. And in a very similar logic, I think it's fair if the US says, look, we move further on deep strike capabilities if the Europeans move. And it's also an irony of history, because I remember very vividly when Olaf Scholz, as the Chancellor, said, I will only move forward with delivering Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine if the US moves on the Abrams.
Right.
So now I think Europe is getting a little bit of its own medicine.
Yeah.
And my bottom line is we all together should use the chance now. Putin's offensive is failed. He is in trouble. So now let's pressure.
Yeah.
Let's move on both sides, Europeans, Germans, and the US. It's the best chance to force him into ceasefire and peace.
All right, let's talk about sanctions. We've referenced, of course, oil and gas. The President Trump has pressured trying to get the EU to quit importing any more Russian oil. Can you remind us who at this point is still importing Russian oil, and what is the EU? Is the EU trying to completely zero it out right now, or is that impossible because of the nature of one or two states' reliance on the oil?
That's a mixed picture, because overall Europe has come a long way since 2022 and getting more independent from Russian oil, gas, LNG. But there is the big question of Indian oil and Indian diesel, for example. And India buys the stuff from Russia and then sells it to the Europeans. And that is where I think at the moment the pressure should be applied, very much in accordance with what President Trump did with secondary tariffs on India. And Putin is sensitive to that. We know that. Unfortunately, some countries even increased imports from Russia in this year. And some countries in Europe did not diversify. I mean, Hungary never really made a real effort to diversify. By the way, I mean, Viktor Orban being close with President Trump, maybe President Trump should say something about this to Viktor Orban.
Yeah, of course.
Hungary should not stop the Europeans from becoming independent from those energy resources from Russia. The European Union has decided to fully move out of Russian gas. So that's done. And what is not, I think, not enough known yet in the US is that the 18th and 19th sanction package of the European Union, I mean, we are already at sanction package number 18 and 19, but they have more measures now against the shadow fleet, where Russia is generating revenue by transporting oil and gas. They have more measures against the Russian energy sector. So the Europeans are getting better at this, and they should be encouraged to do more. But the US should also appreciate that the Europeans have been moving quite far now with the 18th and 19th sanction package that they have put to the table.
So update us, will you? I think the EU, it was also considering some sanctions against China and other foreign companies for buying Russian oil. Is that happening against China? Are you all following suit on what President Trump's trying to do on India?
Yeah, on China, my impression is both sides could do more. There have been ideas and announcement, but nothing implemented so far, neither from the US nor from the Europeans. Both sides could do more on this, also because China is going quite far in delivering components for the masses of drones that are produced by Russia that are killing Ukrainian civilians. I think China deserves to be punished for that and has to have high costs for that to discontinue this practice. When it comes to India, the Europeans are moving something with the 19th sanction package. But then there's also a country-by-country discussion that we need to have. And I can speak for my country. I hope that Chancellor Merz, who is still due to go to India this year, applies more pressure to the Indian side when it comes to this. Now is the time. I mean, let's not give Putin again time to get out of this. Let's do this together now. I'm sure now that the Middle East situation has been in the center of attention, that President Trump will come back to this.
Yeah.
And the Europeans will have to have a conversation how both sides can move.
Yeah. All right. Let's start to move into your views on Russia. It's so interesting that you live there and that you speak Russian, but let's first talk about the state of the Russian economy. I guess I'm surprised by how resilient it's been in its apparent conversion into a wartime economy to try and sustain its actions in Ukraine. Is that fair? Is it just that the Russian economy will suffer in the medium to long term because of this war, but they're doing fine for now, and this industrial juggernaut of military equipment is just going to continue ad infinitum?
Yeah, Russia has a lot of debt when it comes to this. And of course, it's easier to organize this in a country where people have no say in anything. I mean, nobody can complain about anything. In Russia, you end up 10 years in labor camp if you protest with a white piece of paper in your hands. So you can, in contrast to other countries, Putin can make his population suffer and there will be no consequence for him. That makes it, of course, easier. The Russian central bank has been very creative in maneuvering the ruble and in maneuvering the financial resources. And Russia always found possibilities to do either trades or barter deals with other countries to scramble. I would not overestimate the turn to war economy. Yes, Russia is producing a lot of drones and missiles, but I mean, I see on the front line, I see infantrymen without even vehicles trying to storm positions. So we should not be afraid of that, or we should not be afraid of this rhetoric. Oh, Russia is a big war machine now, and nobody can beat Russia. I think that would give a wrong impression. Putin has solved also the recruitment question in Russia for the armed forces financially. But the main revenue stream for all of this is the sale of energy resources. That's why bringing the oil price down and sanctioning Russian oil exports through third countries is so important. I cannot understand why the Europeans, on the one hand, are helping Ukraine and on the other hand, are filling the coffers of Putin by buying energy resources. It doesn't make sense to me.
But it's Hungary and who else?
Yeah, it's also France. It's also, also Germany is also not fully clean when it comes to this. It's a mix. It's a mix of things, and there has been a lot of replacement with energy resources from Norway. Germany wants to buy more and wants to buy even more from the US. So the process is underway. But for example, you could say, let's stop the shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea because they are damaging to the environment. Even those sudden actions, even if they are not intended to go on forever, they could give shocks to the Russian system, because I think what is true about the Russian economy now is Putin does not have very much of a buffer. So if the revenue stream is not there anymore, he cannot go for a very long time. That's why it's so important to increase the pressure now.
Yeah.
The Europeans are moving now under the leadership also of Germany when it comes to using the Russian assets more. So far, only the interest of the confiscated assets has been used.
Right.
Now there are initiatives to use them more. And that is also something Russia is very sensitive to. Let's speed those things up. I think there are many elements moving into the right direction. We just have to move them faster.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I want to get to a question of whether there is some combination of sanctions on oil and gas and long-range precision strikes on refineries and increased military assistance that would force Russia to the table. But before we get to that question, and we'll probably wrap up on that one, tell me a little bit about, well, first, how did you come to live in Russia? And then let's talk a little bit about the regime dynamics. I assume that Putin is still very solid and there is no prospect of him leaving office, if you will.
Yeah, I lived in Russia some time ago, between 2003 and 2006. That's some years ago. I had a fellowship with the Robert Bosch Foundation. I was teaching, by the way, at the university that also is Putin's alma mater, the University of St. Petersburg. And I speak Russian. I also lived in Ukraine. I also speak in Ukrainian, so I have a special connection to the whole region. I had the possibility to follow Putin and his regime for the last 25 years, and some parts of it from inside Russia. And I think the main thing to understand about him is that every relationship is always a power relationship. There is no partnership or equal eye level. There always has to be dominance and power. And that is something the Europeans fail to understand. They always believe, let's have a conversation and let's have a reasonable compromise. I'm convinced that's not possible. You have to be strong. You have to be, I think, willing also to show your strength to get somewhere, but then Putin respects strength. Yeah, that's something that's the language. That's the language he speaks, and so far, I think the US and the Europeans, as much as they have achieved together in supporting Ukraine, they did not go the step of really showing how strong they are and making clear to Putin, look, we are stronger than you. You cannot win this, and we will beat you. And this is something he would react to. But this slow way of dripping in help and then saying things like, we do this as long as it takes, I think they are perceived by him more than signs of weakness.
Yeah.
Of course, Putin now looks, I think, a little bit with interest into what are the next moves of President Trump, because President Trump became more confrontative.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Putin will also do a new charm offensive to get out of that confrontation and to gain time.
Yeah.
We cannot exclude that, but I think everybody, also in the US, should learn from the big offer the US administration made with inviting Putin even to the US, to Alaska, having this big summit, and him not changing his position a little bit. I think that should have consequences also in the approach toward him. Inside of Russia, I think there are many people who are fed up with Putin, including his own former buddies and people who are inside the system. And they are also fed up with Putin's war and with Putin's obsession that he is now a historic figure on a historic mission. I think many people are in Putin's system for more practical reasons, like getting rich, having your kids study abroad, and having a house at the Côte d'Azur. So this kind of historic ideologic mission is not what they got into this for, but they have no possibility to change this. And Russia does not have a habit of changing from the inside. Putin is very isolated and is making lonesome decisions. Nobody can really get through to him. So that the bottom line is he needs to be forced to come to the table by strength. That's the only way. That's the only way of achieving something.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the oligarchs. I know it's conventional wisdom that, if enough oligarchs turned against Putin, he could lose his job. That I think is long since been disproven. Can you outline any threat to the regime whatsoever?
No. I think we should not hope for that, that something is happening from the inside. I think Putin and his power grip has also the oligarchs, or what is left of the oligarchs, under control. He can at will go to them and say, look, you have to now finance this or that, or you have to give away this or that, and they will have to follow. And you should not underestimate, it's very often, everybody knows this, but it's very often underestimated. You should not underestimate how it feels if hundreds of people have been falling out of windows for the last 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes people from the energy sector very high up with their whole families being found dead, even abroad in France or in Italy or in Spain or elsewhere. And if you see sometimes the meetings where all the nomenclatura sits there to listen to Putin, the faces are very unhappy. Yeah, I think there is some very brutal power of fear exercised. And I mean, even in Washington D.C., somebody fell out of a window.
Yeah,
the arm of the Kremlin seems to reach very long. So I would not expect changes from the inside.
Gotcha. So Zelensky is coming to Washington. He says that the meeting will largely be about long-range precision strike and his needs for also needs for more air missile defense, certainly Patriots. But what else is on the agenda? What that's just the public story. What else do you think is being discussed?
I think the questions that are discussed are questions of if there's room for discussions about territorial questions. I think it doesn't get away. What does it mean if Ukraine does not control all of its territory temporarily? There is questions about U.S. engagement for the future armed forces of Ukraine or for security guarantees. What is the U.S. ready to do in support of the Ukrainians who are in first line? The Europeans are in second line. But what is coming from the U.S., especially with deep strike capabilities and with enablers? I think there will be discussions about economic cooperation opportunities, like we saw with the minerals deal and with other issues. And there is, I think, also a question on how to have the Europeans in a position where they do more encouraged by the US, but at the same time having the US there as a major player, because on some, it's also a little bit of a paradox, I understand the US wants to do more, but also the US wants to remain a player when it comes to, let's say, Ukraine recovery and reconstruction, future investments into Ukraine. So there are many, I think, interesting questions to be debated. I think it's a good sign that there are more of those meetings. I had the feeling the last meetings in contrast to former meetings, the last meetings of President Zelensky and President Trump went well. And also there are many phone calls. So I think that's good to be aligned and then to pursue the goal of having a more serious conversation with Vladimir Putin about solutions. I think what is also evident now to all, some had different impressions, if you wind the clock back a couple of months, that the obstacle to a solution to this is Vladimir Putin, not President Zelensky and not Ukraine. It's about Putin who has to change his behavior.
All right. Let's begin to wrap up here, but I'd love for you to sort of predict the future if you could. Let's talk about scenarios. Is it more likely that, I call it muddling through, I kind of feel like we're muddling through right now, that we just sort of see more of the same for the foreseeable future, let's call it short to certainly medium term and maybe longer? Do you think things will just outright freeze and we'll have a frozen conflict? Or do you think there will be a ceasefire agreement brokered, presumably by President Trump? You can do percentages even if you want.
Yeah, that's hard to do, and I would stay away from percentages. But also, after having been to Ukraine a couple of times recently, my impression is the war on the ground in the east can fade out into a low-level equilibrium, which is not a real ceasefire, but is also a lower level of fighting than it is now. And then a sectoral ceasefire might be possible if Ukraine is able, also with the help of US deep strike capabilities, to inflict more pain on the Russian side in the energy sector. And the Europeans and the Americans together apply more pressure to Putin, then it might be possible to have a sectoral ceasefire in the air, not agreeing not to attack each other's energy infrastructures, cities, civilian infrastructures, and so on anymore. Maybe a maritime sector ceasefire in combination with that. And then we would live in a new reality, I believe. Even if there would be some low-level fighting continuing in the east, then there are possibilities for recovery and reconstruction, for building different kinds of relationships, for maybe bringing a European reassurance force into Ukraine and changing things. And it depends on us as Europeans and Americans how fast this is achievable, because I think Putin has to think around November, does he want to send another 100,000 into death in Ukraine without achieving anything? What is his financial situation? What is his energy export situation? So I think there is a chance to achieve something now, but I'm skeptical about a full ceasefire. I think this ground war can continue for a long time. And if we are not changing what we as Europeans and Americans are doing, then indeed the safest prediction is to say it will continue for a long time. There's no end in sight. It can go on for a couple of more years. It certainly does not solve itself. But there is a chance in having a sectoral ceasefire, then maybe a way forward from there. But we are very far away from a long-term peace solution or from a sustainable European peace order. If you want to use such a grandiose term, I think we are very far away from that.
So then there may be some combination of oil sanctions, deep strikes on refineries and increased military and intelligence assistance that could freeze the conflict or maybe force Putin to the table.
And then, I mean, forcing him to the table does not mean that a solution is there.
Yeah.
Putin is a very difficult negotiator, and he will try to gain time and to play the usual shenanigans he's playing, and he will be lying and deceiving, and he will continue fighting during the negotiations. But for now, the goal must be to apply enough pressure to him that he is ready to have a serious conversation. He was not ready to have a serious conversation in Alaska, and that means the pressure needs to be applied to force him to.
Nico Lange, thank you so much for joining NatSec Matters.
Thank you for the invitation.
That was Nico Lange. I'm Michael Allen. If you enjoyed listening to NatSec Matters, please leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please email our team at bgs@bgsdc.com. You can also find this email in the show notes. Please join us next week for another episode of NatSec Matters.
NatSec Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. NatSec Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.